Good morning, everyone. All protocols observed and TGIF. It's my pleasure to share insights this Friday morning on the topic green finance and carbon credits as we endeavor to finance a sustainable future for all. Now, greenhouse gases trap the heat in the Earth's atmosphere, causing the temperature to rise, a phenomenon that we're all familiar with, right? Global warming. So that's one of the symptoms of climate change, and this has seen a rise in extreme weather events. Examples: shifting wildlife habitats and populations and rising sea levels. So an interesting fact, it is predicted that the frequency of extreme weather heat events will double by mid-century, with a 120% increase in intensity. 2024 was the hottest year on record, surpassing 2023, which was the previous record. So this was the first year that the temperature actually exceeded the 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. It actually went to 1.6. So in fact, the 10 warmest years on record have all occurred since 2014. So in the warmest years on record, we expect extreme weather events occurring more often, developing faster, and becoming more intense. The world is witnessing a disturbing acceleration in the number, speed, and scale of broken climate records. We're breaking all the wrong records when it comes to climate change. So I wanted to give some real-life examples of the adverse impacts of climate change. Those pictures look familiar? Yeah? Very, very recent pictures. We had major wildfires burning in LA and the aftermath. I mean, I can't fathom it. Snow-covered parts of the Sunshine State. Right? Another rare weather event. And extreme rainfall is becoming an increasing danger as the climate gets hotter, even from storms that aren't hurricanes. All this after the hottest year on record. So I'll now just kind of introduce you to green finance. I know all of you will be familiar with it, but I'll just reiterate it. So green finance is finance from both public and private sources for activities aiming to mitigate or adapt to the impacts of climate change. So when we say mitigation, it's usually aimed at tackling the causes of climate change, as the greenhouse gas emissions, as I mentioned earlier, and seeking ways to minimize or eliminate the possible impacts of climate change, for example, the higher temperatures. Whereas adaptation now looks at how to reduce the negative effects of climate change. So both strategies are crucial to halting the planet from deteriorating over the coming decades. Both strategies complement each other, and both are paramount for our survival. So why green finance? So I remember a couple of years ago at the previous conference, it was actually 4 trillion was required annually by the year 2030. It's now 4.5 trillion. Right? That's not a small figure. 4.5 trillion is required on an annual basis by the year 2030 to fund clean projects and green infrastructure by the year 2030, according to the International Energy Agency in 2023. And what we're striving to do is to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, right? But we've already surpassed that. Last year was 1.6, right? So we're going in the wrong direction. So while the Paris Agreement is not a legally binding treaty, it is a document that drives global cooperation to limit the causes of global warming. However, President Trump is withdrawing from the Paris Agreement again, reversing US climate policy. The US is currently the world's second largest greenhouse gas emitter behind China, and its departure undermines global ambition to slash those emissions. So in the pre-President Trump era, what we were aiming to do was scale down the consumption of fossil fuels, such as coal and crude oil, as they emit greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide, when the fuels are burnt, while scaling up clean energy, such as renewable energy sources, solar and wind. Again, in the pre-President Trump era, we see that fossil fuel could account for 16% of the energy mix in 2050, with renewable energy contributing most of our future energy needs. Of note is the substantial investment required in renewables, power grids, and energy efficiency to achieve the target goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius in alignment with the Paris Agreement. So that was the pre-President Trump era. What's the post-President Trump era going to look like? Drill, baby, drill. All right, the future energy mix will definitely be different. So financing is an indispensable, integral element of greening the economy. Total energy investment must increase. On the other hand, energy investment must shift from high carbon to low carbon technologies. A decarbonized energy system needs huge investments in renewables, batteries, and upgraded grids. And we need private capital. Private capital is equally critical to overhauling power generation, storage, and transmission. Only a coordinated effort by both the public and private sectors will mobilize the requisite financial flows. So, just taking you back to green bonds. So, green financing is conducted by a financial structure known as green bonds, which are bonds issued in the capital market used to fund projects which have positive environmental and/or climate benefits. So sometimes you might hear them being referred to as climate bonds. And in addition to the green bonds, you also have loans, right? So they're just issued by the banks instead of the capital markets. How the green bond proceeds were over the first half of 2024. Renewable energy was the largest eligible green activity for borrowing under the green bond label, specifically solar and wind energy installations. 35% of issuance for the first half of 2024. And then that was followed by clean or green transportation, primarily electric vehicles at 25%, and green infrastructure at 12%. How is the green bond market for the first half of 2024? European governments actually led the largest green bond issues in the first half of 2024. We had the Italian government, French government, EU, and the European Investment Bank all issuing green bonds in the first 6 months of 2024. And within the corporate sector, utility firms are the main issuers as they are motivated to finance renewable energy infrastructure to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So within the corporate space, you normally see utilities being the large issuers of green bonds. In fact, they had an issuance record at US $58 billion, US $12 billion higher than the first half of 2022, which was the previous record. So something interesting, an article I saw a few days ago. Major US and Canadian banks have withdrawn from the Net Zero Banking Alliance, following pressure from Republican-led states and the election of President Trump over their pledges to scale back funding for fossil fuel projects. BlackRock, some of you guys may know, the world's largest asset manager, has also left the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative due to legal concerns and confusion surrounding its practices. European banks are also reevaluating their participation in net zero alliances. The future of climate finance initiatives is uncertain. So just quickly, why issue the green bonds? To really diversify your investor base. You have endowments and charities and millennials who be looking for promoting green bonds and promoting green initiatives, and also to improve the reputation of companies who signal strong commitments to their decarbonization targets. right? And I think we've spoken ad nauseum about are your bonds truly green? Because you always have to verify and make sure that it's done for a specific purpose, the funds are earmarked for a specific goal, and you have to then monitor, right? And all this is to prevent greenwashing, right? And greenwashing is actually a marketing tool. So you actually see it within the cosmetic sector, Volkswagen, they have lots of examples of greenwashing. Green finance partnerships, so you have green bonds are increasingly available through partnerships between governments, supranational and private investors, financiers. However, greater attention must be paid to accountability, transparency, citizen engagement, and ensuring adequate returns on investments for private investors. So we're making some progress. So this is our report card. We're faring okay, but we could do better. So we are progressing, but we have to continue to work harder and reverse the trend of breaking all the wrong records when it comes to climate change to shape a sustainable future for all. But now there's a twist. We're now in the midst of a new paradigm, and that's President Trump. Okay, I just want to quickly go through carbon credits 101. Previous speakers would have mentioned it, but I'll just quickly go through it. And carbon credits are permits that allow the owner to emit a certain amount of carbon dioxide, right? And there's a one-to-one correlation. 1 carbon credit equals to 1 ton of carbon dioxide. And how are these carbon credits generated, right? They're generated by projects that reduce or remove greenhouse gas emissions. So projects, for example, which would reduce the greenhouse gas would be like renewable energy projects, the solar, the wind farms, hydroelectric dams, as well as energy efficiency projects. And the projects which would remove greenhouse gas emissions would be carbon capture and storage projects and elimination of methane emissions in various settings such as landfills. So carbon credits, we know, can be bought and sold, but we have to be very careful because the price will depend on, well, supply and demand, economics 101, but it will also depend on the quality, type, size, and location of the project. So all those factors will impact on the cost of a carbon credit. I just want to give an example of how it works. So say we have 2 companies, emitter A and emitter B, and they're only allowed to emit 300 tons of carbon each, right? When it comes to the regulatory market, so each company is issued a certain number of carbon credits each year. So emitter A is on track to emit 400 tons of carbon. Perhaps maybe it's an older plant and it's not efficient with its operations. And we have emitter B, who is perhaps concentrated on greening their operations, so they only be emitting 200 tons. So to avoid a penalty now, perhaps any fines and extra taxes, emitter A can make up for emitting the 100 extra tons of carbon dioxide by purchasing credits from emitter B, right, which has surplus emissions due to producing 100 tons less carbon. Right, so that's a cute little example of how it would work. So carbon credits create a monetary incentive for companies to reduce their carbon emissions. Again, verifying. We have to verify. We don't want to be double counting, anything like that. And one example is Vera's Verified Carbon Standard Program. And they boast about over 1,700 certified green projects, which have removed more than 714 million metric tons of carbon from the atmosphere. And why we want to verify carbon credits? What's the magical word? I ain't hearing it. Greenwashing. All right, we want to prevent greenwashing, so that's why we want to make sure that everything is verified and we can account and measure everything. Because what they've noticed in the past is that projects have overstayed their ability to sequester carbon, and they're perhaps sometimes shown to actually increase overall emissions, right? So we have to be very, very careful. Quickly, the advantages of carbon credits. They could reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as I alluded to earlier, and create economic incentives. We just have to be careful. The market remains a bit immature and complex, right? So there's a wide variation in project types, developers, location, and cost. And because I'm from finance, I have to tell you about the market size. The market size is roughly 1.5 trillion in 2024, up from 950 billion in 2023. and that's equivalent to 15.7 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent traded across compliant markets worldwide. So carbon credits, they're tradable, they're can be used as part of countries' NDCs, and they reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I just want to close with climate change is real, and don't let anybody in the red states fool you. And secondly, green financing is an integral part to finance any mitigation and adaptation strategies, but it could be in jeopardy as a result of the latest administration change in the US.